Excerpt from the book Cheaper by the Dozen, written by Frank and Ernestine Gilbert. It was shortly after the measles epidemic that Dad started applying motion studies to surgery to try to reduce the time required for certain operations.
Surgeons really aren't much different from skilled mechanics, except that they're not so skilled. If I can get to study their motions, I can speed them up. The speed of an operation often means the difference between life and death.
At first, the surgeons he approached weren't very cooperative.
I don't think it'll work. We aren't dealing with machines, we're dealing with human beings. No two human beings are alike, so no set of motions could be used over and over again.
I know it will work. Just let me take some moving pictures of the operations and I'll show you.
Finally, he got permission to set up his movie equipment in an operating room. After the film was developed, he put it in the projector, which he kept in the parlor, and showed us what he had done. Each doctor and nurse was dressed in white and had a number on his cap to identify him. Off to the left, clad in a white shirt, was something that resembled a snow-covered owl. When the owl turned around, it had a stopwatch in its hand, and when it smiled at the camera, you could tell through the disguise that it was Dad. It seemed to us, watching the moving pictures, that the doctors did a rapid, business-like job of a complicated abdominal operation. But Dad, cranking the projector in back of us, kept hollering that it was.
Stupidity Incorporated. Look at that boob. The doctor with number 3 on his cap, watch what he's going to do now. Walk all the way around the operating table. Now see him reach way over there for that instrument. And then he decides he doesn't want that one after all. He wants this one. He should call the instrument's name, and that nurse, number 6, she's his caddy, should hand it to him. That's what she's here for. And look at his left hand, dangling there at his side. Why doesn't he use it? He could work twice as fast.
The result of the moving picture was that the surgeons involved managed to reduce their ether time by 15%. Dad was far from satisfied. He explained that he needed to take moving pictures of 5 or 6 operations, all at the same type, so that he could sort out the good motions from the wasted motions. The trouble was that most of the patients refused to be photographed, and the hospitals were afraid of lawsuits.
Never mind, dear.
Mother told him.
I'm sure the opportunity will come along, eventually, for you to get all the pictures that you want.
I don't like to wait. When I start a project, I hate to put it aside and pick it up again piecemeal whenever I find a patient, hospital, and doctor who don't object to photographs.
Then an idea hit him, and he snapped his fingers.
I know. I've got it. Dr. Burton has been after me to come have the kids' tonsils out. He says they really have to come out. We'll rig up an operating room in the laboratory here and take pictures of Burton.
It seems sort of heartless to use the children as guinea pigs.
It does for a fact. And I won't do it unless Burton says it's perfectly all right. If taking pictures is going to make him nervous or anything, we'll have the tonsils taken out without the motion study.
Somehow or other, I can't imagine Dr. Burton being nervous.
Me either. I'm going to call him. And you know what? I feel a little guilty over this whole ordeal, so as a conscience bomb, I'm going to let the old butcher take mine out too.
I feel a little guilty about the whole thing too. Only thank goodness I had mine taken out when I was a girl.
Dr. Burton agreed to do the job in front of a movie camera.
I'll save you for the last, old pioneer. The best for last. Since the first day I laid eyes on your great, big, beautiful tonsils, I knew I had to have my hands on them.
Stop drooling and put away your scalpel, you old flatterer you. I intend to be the last. I'll have mine out after the kids get better.
I'll start with Anne and go right down the ladder, through Ernestine, Frank, Bill, and Lillian. Martha doesn't need to have her tonsils out, and the children younger than Lillian can wait a while.
The night before the mass operation, Martha was told she would sleep at the house of Dad's oldest sister, Aunt Anne.
I don't want you underfoot. The children are going to have their tonsils out and won't be able to have supper tonight or breakfast in the morning. And I don't want you to lord it over them.
Martha hadn't forgotten how we neglected her when she finally came down with the measles. She lorded it over us plenty before she finally departed.
And Anne always has apple pie for breakfast,
She said, which we all knew to be perfectly true, except that sometimes it was blueberry instead of apple.
She keeps a jar of donuts in the pantry and she likes children to eat them.
This, too, was unfortunately no more than the simple truth.
Tomorrow morning, when you are awaiting the knife, I will be thinking of you. I shall try, if I am not too full, to dedicate a donut to each of you.
She rubbed her stomach with a circular motion and puffed out her cheeks horribly, as if she were chewing on a whole donut. She opened an imaginary donut jar and helped herself to another, which she rammed into her mouth.
My goodness, Aunt Anne.
she said, pretending that the lady was in the room.
Those donuts are even more delicious than usual. Well, why don't you have another, Martha? Thanks, Aunt Anne. I believe I will. Why don't you have 2 or 3, Martha? I'm so full of apple pie, I don't know whether I could eat 2 more, Aunt Anne. But since it makes you happy to have people eat your cooking, I will do my best.
We told Martha we'd hope she'd choke. The next morning, the 5 of us selected to give our tonsils for motion study assembled in the parlor. As Martha had predicted, our stomachs were empty. They growled and rumbled. In the laboratory, which adjoined the parlor, Dad, his movie cameraman, a nurse, and Dr. Burton were converting a desk into an operating table and setting up a cross-section background and lights. Dad came into the parlor, dressed like an elf again.
All right, Anne, come on.
He thumped her on the back and smiled at the rest of us.
There's nothing to it. It'll be over in just a few minutes. And think of the fun we'll have looking at the movies and seeing how each of you looks when he's asleep.
As he and Anne went out, we could see that his hands were trembling. Sweat was beginning to pop through his white robe. Mother came in and sat with us. Dad wanted her to watch the operation, but she said,
I just can't, dear. It will be too difficult.
After a while, we heard Dad and a nurse walking heavily up the front stairs, and we knew Anne's operation was over and she was being carried to bed.
I know I'm next, and I won't say I'm not scared.
Ernestine confided.
But I am so hungry, all I can think of is Martha and that pie. That lucky dog. Can we have pie and donuts after our operation, Mother?
Mother, who had already had her tonsils out, said,
Yes, dear. You can have them after the operation, if you want them, that is.
Dad came into the room. His robe was dripping sweat now. It looked as if a spring thaw had come to the Alps.
Nothing to it. And I know we got some great movies. Anne slept just like a baby. All right, Ernestine girl, you're next. Let's go.
I'm not hungry anymore. I'm just scared.
A nurse put a napkin saturated with ether over Ern's nose. The last thing she remembered was Mr. Coggin, Dad's photographer, grinding away at the camera.
He should be cranking at 2 revolutions a second.
She thought.
I'll count and see if he is. And 1, and 2, and 3, and 4. That's the way Dad says to count seconds. You have to put the and in between the numbers to count at the right speed. And 1, and 2, and 3.
She fell asleep. Dr. Burton peered into her mouth.
My heavens, Gilbreth, I told you I didn't want Martha.
You haven't got Martha. That's Ernestine.
Are you sure?
Of course, I'm sure, you idiots. Don't you think I know my own children?
You must be mistaken. Look at her carefully. There, now, isn't that Martha?
You mean to say you think I can't tell one child from another?
I don't mean to say anything, except that if this isn't Martha, we've made a horrible mistake.
We? We? I've made no mistake, and I hope I'm wrong in imagining the sort of mistake you've made.
You see, all I know them by is their tonsils. I thought these tonsils were Martha. They were the only pair that didn't have to come out.
No. Oh, no. Do you mean to tell me you've knocked my little girl unconscious for no good reason at all?
It looks as if I've done just that, Gilbreth. I'm sorry, but it's done. It was careless, but you do have an uncommon lot of them, and they all look just alike to me.
All right, Burton. I'm sorry, I lost my temper. What do we do?
I'm going to take them out anyway. They'd have to come out eventually at any rate, and the worst part of an operation is dreading it beforehand. She'd done her dreading, and there's no use to make her do it twice.
As Dr. Burton leaned over her, some reflex caused Ernestine to knee the doctor in the mouth.
Oh, okay, Ernestine, if that's really your name, I guess I deserve that.
As it turned out, Ernestine's tonsils were recessed and bigger than the doctor had expected. It was a little messy to get at them, and Mr. Coggin, the movie cameraman, was sick in the wastebasket.
Don't stop cranking, or your tonsils will be next. I'll pull them out by the roots myself. Crank, by jingo, crank.
Mr. Coggin cranked. When the operation was over, Dad and the nurse carried Ernestine upstairs. When Dad came into the parlor to get Frank, he told Mother to send someone over to Aunt Anne's for Martha.
Do we have to, dear? She's probably had so much to eat for breakfast.
Apple pie, donuts or not, she's going to have her tonsils out. And I'm not going to go through another day like this one in a hurry.
Frank, Bill, and Lillian had their tonsils out, in that order. Then Martha arrived, bawling, kicking, and full of pie and donuts.
You said I didn't have to have my tonsils out.
She screamed at the doctor. Before he could get her on the desk, which served as an operating table, Martha kicked him in the stomach. As soon as he could get a breath, Dr. Burton said to Dad,
"The next time I come to your house, I'm going to wear a chest protector and a catcher's mask."
Then he said to the nurse,
Give some ether to Martha, if that's really her name.
Yes, I'm Martha. You're making a mistake.
I told you she was Martha.
I know. Let's not get into that again. She's Martha, but I've named her tonsils Ernestine. Open your mouth, Martha, you sweet child, and let me get Ernestine's tonsils. Craig on, Mr. Coggin. Your film may be the first photographic record of a man slowly going berserk.
All of us felt terribly sick that afternoon, but Martha was in agony. While we were recuperating, Dad spent considerable time with us, but minimized our discomfort and kept telling us we were just looking for sympathy.
Don't tell me.
He said,
I saw the operations, didn't I? Why, there's only the little tiniest cut at the back of your throat. I don't understand how you can do all that complaining. Do you remember the story about the Spartan boy who kept his mouth shut while the fox was chewing on him?
It was partly because of our complaining and the desire to show us how the Spartan boy would have had his tonsils out that Dad decided to have only a local anesthetic for his operation. Mother, Grandma, and Dr. Burton all advised against it, but Dad wouldn't listen.
Why does everyone want to make a mountain out of a molehill over such a minor operation? I want to keep an eye on Burton and see that he doesn't mess up the job.
The first day we children were well enough to get up, Dad and Mother set out in the car for Dr. Burton's office. Mother had urged Dad to call a taxi. She didn't know how to drive, and she said Dad probably wouldn't feel like doing the driving on the way home, but Dad laughed at her qualms.
We'll be back in an hour. Wait for lunch. I'm starving.
Dad called to us as he tested his 3 horns to make sure he was prepared for any emergency.
You've got to hand it to him.
Anne admitted as the Pierce arrow bucked up Wayside Place.
He's the bee's knees, all right. We were all scared to death before our operations, and look at him. He's looking forward to it.
2 hours later, a taxi cab stopped in front of the house, and the driver jumped out and opened the door for his passengers. Then Mother emerged, pale and red-eyed. She and the driver helped a crumpled mass of moaning blue surge to light. Dad's hat was rumpled and on sideways. His face was gray and sagging. He wasn't crying, but his eyes were watering. He couldn't speak, and he couldn't smile.
He sure got a load on all right, Mrs. Gilbreth.
Said the taxi driver.
And still early in the afternoon, too. I didn't know he touched the stuff myself.
We waited for lightning to strike, but it didn't. The seriousness of Dad's condition may be adjudged by the fact that he contented himself with a withering look. Mother replied in one of the shortest speeches of her career,
Keep a civil tongue in your head. He's deathly ill.
Mother and Grandma helped Dad upstairs. We could hear him moaning all the way downstairs. Mother told us about it that night, while Dad was snoring under the effects of sleeping pills.
I waited in Dr. Burton's anteroom while the doxelectomy was being performed. When the operation was half over, your father came out into the anteroom, grinning and waving one tonsil and a pair of forceps.
One down and one to go, Lily. Completely painless, just like rolling off a log.
After what seemed like an interminable time, your father came out into the waiting room again and reached for his hat and coat. He was still grinning, only not so wide as before.
That's it, almost painless. All right, boss, let's go. I'm still hungry.
Then, as I watched, his high spirits faded and he began to fall to pieces.
I'm stabbed! I'm hemorrhaging! Burton, come here quick! What have you done to me?
Dr. Burton came out of his office. It must be said to his credit that he was sincerely sympathetic. He had had his own tonsils out.
You'll be all right, old pioneer. You just had to have it the hard way.
Dad spent 2 weeks in bed, and it was the first time any of us remembered his being sick. He couldn't smoke, eat, or talk, but he could glare, and he glared at Bill for 2 full minutes when Bill asked him one afternoon if he had had his tonsils out like the Spartans used to have theirs removed. Dad didn't get his voice back until the very day that he finally got out of bed. He was lying there, propped up on pillows, reading his office mail. There was a card from Mr. Coggin, the photographer.
Hate to tell you, Mr. Gilbreth, but none of the moving pictures came out. I forgot to take off the inside lens cap. I'm terribly sorry, Coggin. P.S. I quit.
Dad threw off the covers and reached for his bathrobe. For the first time in 2 weeks, he spoke.
I will track him down to the ends of the earth. I'll take a blunt button hook and pull his tonsils out by the bijingo roots, just like I promised him. If he doesn't quit, he's fired. Thank you.